Good evening, everybody.
Good evening,
Good to
Ken.
see everyone. Welcome,
Good evening.
everyone, to episode 563. Samuel, the last judge, and a consequential transitional leader of Israel. And tonight we have Tracy and Michael. And as always, Dr. Ricks, if you would start us out, that would be wonderful.
Okay, we're going to start off with some of my favorite things to smile over, my favorite groaners. One of them is the man said, I was addicted to the dance, the hokey pokey, but I turned myself around.
Oh, my.
Put a star on that. I like that joke. That's funny.
My recliner is one of my best friends. Why? We go way back. The man says his wife is a very petite woman and she got real large in her second pregnancy. And by her 9th month, she was so big that she got used to people kind of teasing her about it a little bit. One day she waddled into the post office and the clerk said, I don't think I can help you, ma'am. And she said, what? Aren't you supposed to handle deliveries? Now, this is my pièce resistance. This man and his wife went into one of these giant box appliance convenience stores. They have a section where they advise you on remodeling, plumbing and appliances and mirrors and tiles and all that. And so they go in there and they and the clerk start debating what's the best material, how to put it up, what do we want, what don't we want. And the customer and his wife are getting frustrated. They can't agree with this guy. And they say, don't you have any, sales reps or people who understand this? Is there anybody in this store smarter than you? He said, yes. They saw you coming and ran out. That actually happened to someone I know. I'm making that up. They had these 19, 20-year-old kids who didn't know anything, and they want to. Anyway. But sales theory, that's bad when your salesmen know nothing and could care less. Okay. Samuel starts off with a miraculous birth. Isn't it amazing how many great figures in the Bible, their mothers were unable to conceive except by a miraculous birth? And when they conceived, that child was given special attention, was especially important. And later, of course, God gave them a special role to play. Like people like Isaac, Joseph, and John the Baptist fit that category.
And Samuel.
And Samuel.
Yeah.
Isn't that a great start for a person to be a special child?
Mm-hmm.
A miracle child. I mean, you think of that's a great start in life.
Well, you got people praying for you before you're even there. Like that's pretty amazing. People are already, interceding for whatever they what an amazing life, Samuel had on that account.
And his mother, she went to the high priest, and the other lady was making fun of her for being barren as well. But she said, if you give me a child, I will dedicate him to God. And the high priest said, your request will be honored. And out popped Samuel. And could you read our first scripture, please, Ken?
Sure. So it came to pass in the process of time that Hannah conceived and bore a son, and called his name Samuel, saying, because I have asked for him from the Lord. And then no one is holy like the Lord, for there is none besides you, nor is there any rock like our God.
By the way, in chapter 2, it's a poem written by Hannah, or she wrote part of the Bible. And it's a poem thanking God for Samuel. And we just read one verse out of it, but a bunch of verses. Anybody wants to read the whole poem. And Samuel's name, according to the experts, means heard by God, or sounds like meaning heard by God. So he had a name that had a special meaning to it as well.
Yeah, and her prayer, this prayer here, this poem in chapter 2, it's amazing. There's some heavy and some profound stuff in there. Like the last line of it is, "The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken to pieces, and out of heaven he'll thunder, and he'll judge the ends of the earth, and he'll give strength unto his king." You know, for what Samuel was going to do, but then for the the prophetic implications, through David and on to Christ, and then when Christ returns, like that's powerful, yet future stuff, and exalt the horn of his anointed. Like that's heavy what she had there.
Yeah, it's a great poem to read, and it might have been in some kind of meter. A lot of times when you transfer from Hebrew to English, you don't hear the meter because it's a different language. But it would, and if it was in some kind of rhyming meter, then it would be even better, more powerful. Probably was, or at least to some extent was. And then the boy got special communications. And I want to just describe, we think somewhere when he was young, maybe 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, he was just a young boy. He was the reliable assistant to Eli, the high priest. And one night he heard his name called. And he ran to Eli and said, "Here I am. What can I do for you?" He said, "I didn't call you." 3 times that happened. And then, would you read 1 Samuel 2:18, please, Ken?
And Samuel ministered before Jehovah, a boy girded with a linen ephod, and his mother made him a little coat and brought it to him from year to year. And the boy Samuel grew on and was in favor both with Jehovah and also with men.
And now that's just kind of set the stable. He was already kind of well-liked. Now let's go to 1 Samuel 3:8, please, Ken.
Jehovah called again the third time, "Samuel," and he arose and went to Eli and said, here am I, for thou called me." And Eli perceived that Jehovah was calling the boy, and Eli said to Samuel, "Go lie down, and it shall be, if he call thee, that thou shalt say, Speak, Jehovah, for thy servant heareth." So Samuel went and laid down in his place.
And even if you go with the translation, "Speak, Lord," but we believe that Lord, well, Jehovah is the English version of God's sacred name. Let me sure I say that, because people argue, is that how it sounded in Hebrew? But my point would be, God speaks English, so he understands. It's the English version of his sacred name. I think that keeps us out of trouble for people who get all uptight about that sort of thing, right? God can speak English. So that's the English version of what it meant when Samuel answered God. Wouldn't that be dramatic for God to be calling you, and then all of a sudden you hear this voice all around you, and you know it's God speaking directly to you?
Yeah, that direct communication, and the import of what he ended up saying to him about Eli's sons and all that first message that he was given. It's daunting, and it's a strong judgment, that's for sure.
He didn't want to tell Eli, but Eli pressured him, and he told him what God wanted him to say. And we believe for the rest of his life, he could get direct messages from God. There aren't that many prophets in the Bible who get direct messages from God.
Like what it says here at the end of verse 10, where it says, "And Samuel said, Speak, for your servant is listening." And I like to say for us today, do we listen when God speaks to us? And I don't mean it in the way that Samuel had it, but when you get a holy, righteous thought, you can entertain that God put that there. If Satan is the prince of the power of the air and he can broadcast to us, we know when he broadcasts to us, it's usually an unholy thought. But again, are we paying attention in this day and age to the power of the Holy Spirit when God speaks a holy, righteous thought? Do we recognize it? I think sometimes we don't. I know I usually get a thought in my head and I'll use it in maybe that week's video Bible study I do. And I hadn't entertained maybe that thought in months. And all of a sudden, it's like, okay, I'm paying attention, Lord. You just keep feeding me, and I'll be your servant, and I'll use it as best I can to preach the gospel to people listening in.
I heard one man say that we don't need, and this is of course debatable, we don't need a prophet right now because God's told us a lot of things in the Bible. I think the more we know the Bible, the more we're familiar with it, when we need it, God can remind us of what it said about a situation we might be facing. Mm-hmm. And then God's words can like pop into our minds.
Yeah, there's an there's an interesting interplay of both of those here. Eli being the high priest and also knowing the way that his sons were behaving and how that was causing the worship of the true God to be treated in Israel at that time, should have known. And yet it took it took God's intervention, but this prophecy came to illuminate that and to warn him of what was going to happen. His response is what 1 Samuel 3:18. Eli's response to that is, "It is the Lord. Let him do what seems to him good, what seems good to him." It's a sad thing, and yet because he did not restrain, being the high priest, he should have been able to restrain his sons, and that's what I like about this book is there's a profound truth in there, and very like gospel type truths in a lot of this. It's the same as when Christ says, if any man doesn't love me more than mother or brother and father or whatever it may be, more than your family, more than the things that are closest to you, if you'll go against what God says for them, like that's not good enough. You can't do that. And Eli got smacked with that. His whole family got smacked with that real hard. That's a potent warning. And to have Christ bring out that same thing. I mean, yeah, in the position of the high priest, you should have known better. But in the position of a called out, a baptized Christian, you should know better. And if you find out, if you get a warning about it, you should do something about it. It's a demonstration that he's not playing.
One thing occurs to me as parents, and so I'm pleading guilty too. You love your son so much that often you're not as hard on them as you should be. And by the way, that's one of the criticism of David, especially with Absalom and Absalom's brother, whose name I forgot, but it'll come later. They were spoiled rotten, which apparently is the case. They're very good looking, and that may have made it worse. But the point is, Eli should have fired his two sons. And I know that's something nobody would want to do, but don't you agree? The thing about the Bible, it tells you sometimes what the heroes didn't do.
Mm-hmm. And that theme comes back around because once Samuel is old and his sons are then involved, the people say, no, these guys, they take bribes and they pervert judgment and they do all this stuff. They say they're not like you. Like it's a witness to Samuel, to his righteousness and his dedication. He served God, his entire life and faithfully and so on and so forth. But he faced that same kind of situation as Eli, and it's got to be terribly sad. And, Eli's statement, let the Lord do what seems good to him when you're talking about cutting off his whole family. Ouch, ouch.
When you look at, there's some rich families, I've seen some of their life stories, like the Rockefellers, and I can't remember them all, the names right off, the Gettys. Often by the time you get to the second, third, and fourth generations, the guy who built the fortune had to be lean, smart, disciplined, and tough. But his kids who enjoyed the privileges of being on top were spoiled, and you can't really recreate the environment that you grew up in. You know what I'm saying? Right. It's and that's a real problem. And in some ways, I admire the British royalty in some ways. They have a code of honor that when you've been in royalty all your life, and the British monarchy's done very well, but they have removed some men as being king and placed their brothers in their place because they were screwing up. Several, at least one or two I can think of historically. And so they've managed, and daughters too. They've managed to have sons and daughters that were reasonable for the role they had to play. And that's hard to do when you grow up a royal. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Can you say though that, like, as far as UK goes today, the royalty in UK is far from honorable, and there's been a lot of evil deeds that they have done in the recent years. And sadly, maybe that's just what happens. Sometimes families in that position of power and royalty, they take things for granted and they quit working hard because it's all been handed to them. And I think that goes to what you were saying, Dr. Ricks. You know, if you're given everything and you don't have to work hard for it, then what's in your future? What are you going to develop? What are you going to build on? What are you going to create? And I think that gets lost in the British royalty of today.
Yeah, most royal families in Europe went to disaster and got run out of the country, killed. And I think it's maybe because it's David's throne, the British royalty. In the 20th century, when they were getting rid of a lot of them, they actually got more popular. I may be wrong about this because it's hard to know being this far away. I know it's a distraction, but it could be the Prince Williams and Kate
Middleton.
Whatever her last name. Middleton. I mean, she's related to Winston Churchill, by the way. They seem to be better than the average considering the situation they're in. Now, Harry is a different story, and some of the other family members.
Prince Andrew, you talk about, like pushing, like, sorry, we can't accept this kind of thing. Prince Andrew certainly is kind of embarrassing right now, and things that have swirled around. Queen remained very popular. I read a book about Prince Philip, who was a prince of Greece in his own right. He wasn't technically the English king, but married to Elizabeth all those years. Very interesting. It's a life of you got luxury and fame, obviously, and a lot of stuff that goes along with that. He was very famous as a young prince and a war hero and all this stuff. But what an odd life of pressure you end up having to live. It is hard, and yet Elizabeth certainly kept everybody's respect her entire life, and William has done a very good job as well. And God provides, maybe provides somebody to keep it going.
So all we're saying is we understand, at least partly, why the sons of the high priest often turned out to be bums.
Hey, there's a good everyday example that repeats itself often in America, because there are a lot of people that immigrate from poor places and work extremely hard to give their kids, the super first world kind of life and everything, and musically, the whole thing, and push them on through education, do whatever. But then there's a lot that, get over here and work hard, and then their kids grow up as Americans, and that's not, the ethics gone. Like, they totally just glom onto our culture, which is not always the best as far as vigorous activity. And a lot of kids don't want to do jobs, and certainly these lowly types of jobs. You kind of get uppity and it mess everything up.
One thing you'll know, a lot of first and second generation immigrants who come here to get the American dream, you give them 20 years here and they do very well. You'd be surprised how many people, either they or their parents, like Vivek Ramaswamy, his parents migrated here, but at 40 years, they've been here, and now look at how well he's doing, or 50 years, whatever it is exactly. He'll probably be the next governor of Ohio, right, Ken?
Yeah, he's running, and I'm sure Ohio's getting more conservative. Seems like every time we have an election here. Yeah, well, hopefully we put him over the top, and then maybe he can end property tax. That's what I'm voting for.
Right, Ken? You got a lot of property.
You run on the platform to end property tax, buddy. I vote for you all day long.
Well, so we can kind of see the problem they went into. Would you go to, but he was a great judge. Could you 1 Samuel 3:19, please, Ken?
So Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. And all of Israel from Dan to Beersheba knew that Samuel had been established as a prophet of the Lord. Then the Lord appeared again in Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel in Shiloh by the word of the Lord.
Just to move on, let's go to 1 Samuel 7:13 before we discuss it. It's kind of on how successful he was.
So the Philistines were subdued, and they came no more into the coast of Israel. And the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines, and that all the days of Samuel, and the cities which the Philistines had taken from Israel were restored to Israel, from Ekron even unto Gath, and the coast thereof did Israel deliver out of the hands of the Philistines. And let's see, and there was peace between Israel and the Amorites.
It's not that Samuel was a warrior. It's just that when he blessed the troops before they went into battle, they won because he was praying for them. And you'll see some examples at it in the book of Samuel. And it's in other books, you'll see like when Moses held his hands up and prayed for Israel against the Amalekites and others, they won. God backs up certain prophets. And by the way, that land of the Philistines is where Gaza is now. And you never know, anyway, I saw a video on the Amalekites and the Philistines, and a lot of their genetic materials kind of disappeared. But he says it's probably parts of it are in the various people in the Middle East to this day. So maybe Hamas is part Philistine. They certainly act like it, don't they?
I think it's interesting, an interesting parallel with what we just read. So because of Samuel being a good prophet, he had connections to the eternal. And then the men of the land and the king was blessed with peacetime. And that's a blessing because they were close to God at that time. And you can look at the parallel of today, and you can look at that region of the world, and that part of the world is far from God today. The Jews never accepted Christ. They live out of the Old Testament. Clearly, God said that Israel, modern days Jews or Judah, would prevail against their enemies until the abomination of desolation. But prior to that, God was going to be with them prophetically, and that's happening. But it doesn't mean that Israel is close to God. And there is no modern day prophet that the nation Israel, modern day, let's say Judah, can rely upon. So they had the benefit of having this man of God amongst them, and that's lacking today.
By the way, that's one of the questions people debate. Will God bring a prophet to Israel before the end time? One thing we know is that the two witnesses will preach around the temple. Obviously, the third temple doesn't exist yet, but when it does, the two witnesses will preach around the temple. I preach in the temple and probably around it, and therefore they'll be in the Jerusalem area. How many years? Obviously, the big question is, how far away is that? 10 years, 20 years, 12 years, 7 years?
Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? It could be faster than that.
It's dicey ceasefire right now. You never know what's going to go on over there. Stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, and Europe seems to be it seems like they've got war on their minds. All they want to do is go to war. And it's weird how all that's fallen out there. So who knows how fast things. But while I got everybody in this, we're about halfway through or better, and our concurrent viewers is pretty high. I wanted to make an announcement that Mike will be up at our church group up near Detroit in Romulus, Michigan, coming up the 17th. Oh, 15th and 16th.
Next weekend.
So 15th. The next Sabbath, not tomorrow, but next Sabbath, and then we'll be back Sunday at 1:00 at the trying to think of the name of the hotel now.
Wingate.
Wyndham, Wingate. Yeah. Well, anyway, you can find out online where he's going to be, and hopefully we'll see you there. If you could be there, that'd be wonderful.
Ken's going to be there.
Yep. And we will probably stream that on our Detroit ICG channel where we stream our sermons that we have up in Michigan about usually every other week. We'll be there tomorrow and then the following week as well. Then the next week he'll be in Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, on that Sabbath, if you're anywhere in the area, we'd love to see you guys. Anybody out there? I mean, it'd be awesome. Get together, study, fellowship. It's good. It's good time. Excited to be going up there. We're going to Toronto too in the week. We're hoping to have a meal together on Tuesday evening. And anybody that's interested in going to that, Canadian brethren up there, you know, come on. We'd love to see everybody. So get in touch with us and let's do this thing.
well,
And that's with that lady in Canada that's always
Yeah,
lives in
Miss
Toronto.
Yvonne Bryden is a wonderful
Yvonne
lady.
Bright, yes.
Yeah, handles
Well,
all the Canadian mail and all that. Is a wonderful lady.
do you know what hotel you're going to be in Cleveland? Have you?
In Cleveland, we're going to be at the Aloft Cleveland Airport. It's right by the airport there in Cleveland. It's called Aloft.
yep.
Aloft Cleveland Airport. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, that's have a good time.
We plan on
Yeah,
it.
I'm excited.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Wonderful. Getting back to the transformational nature of Samuel, he was there when they transitioned from a theocracy to a monarchy. And I want to just add something before we get to the scripture. One of the tests that Saul failed was God requires a separation between the theocratic, if you want to call it, government machinery and the secular government machinery. And one king even got leprosy when he tried to cross over that. And Samuel told him to wait a week, but God tested him, and before his time was out, he just said, well, you know, the Philistine army's in position. I just had to take over the role of the high priest. You didn't come in time. And that's when Samuel said, well, you just failed the final test. God was going to use you as a king in the future, but no longer. God does not want the central government getting too much power over people's lives. He wants the religion and the secular government to be run separately. Not that they oppose each other, but run separately.
So that where they get separation of church and state.
I think
No,
that's
I know.
Yeah.
I just had to throw it in there. That's all.
Yeah. You know, and in that episode is when Samuel uses the phrase that said the Lord is going to seek himself a man after his own heart. That's the first time it uses that phrase, I believe, and that's in 1 Samuel 13 that he says that.
So let's go read 1 Samuel 8:7, please, Ken.
And the Lord said to Samuel, heed the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them, according to all the works which they have done since that day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, with which they have forsaken me and served other gods, so they are doing to you also.
It was really, God just tells us it's just an excuse. They were not very godly people. And I guess all human beings are that way. So even if God had called some other nation, they probably would have done maybe different things, but they would have given them trouble too. I mean, given God trouble. They wanted to be like everybody else. They wanted a human king. Could you read verse 9, please?
Now therefore heed their voice. However, you shall solemnly forewarn them and show them the behavior of the king who will reign over them.
And he's given them a warning about overtaxation and losing personal freedoms to a big central government. By the way, Israel had no central government. They basically were 12 tribes. I guess they had village elders and stuff that ran things, tribal leaders, but God supplied a big national leader when they needed one to go to war. Often they were called judges or prophets, but they actually did not have a big central government. They didn't pay taxes to a government. And they were supposed to tithe, but remember, tithing, there was no IRS. If you didn't tithe, nobody came for you. You just weren't blessed. And I know we probably don't think of that, but think about a world where there is no IRS.
God's plan for a nation was very generous for everybody to own land that they were not taxed on, to be able to support themselves, and even if they had to mortgage it for a while, you were guaranteed that it was not going to leave your family. It was supposed to return. There was supposed to be a release of debts. I mean, it's very it's very generous, and I don't know, it's a very forgiving system.
Yeah. Every Jubilee, land went back to original family, whether they were good business stewards or not. They got it back.
Yeah, yeah. They mortgage it again.
Yeah, it's like in most of the world, the powerful accumulated more and more land, and the poor became serfs working on the land. And almost every culture, more or less, went that way. So would you read 1 Samuel 8:14, please, Ken?
And he will take your fields, even the best of them, and give them to his servants, and he will take your manservants and your maidservants and your goodliest young men.
In effect, he's going to institute a draft, both military and for other services that he wants. Would you read the rest of that, please, Ken?
And your asses, and put them into his work, and ye shall cry out in that day because of your king, which ye shall have chosen you, which ye shall have chosen you, and the Lord will not hear you in that day.
Now, I want to put up a thing called the core beliefs. And it's an article that hopefully will be in the church magazine soon, and maybe in the Buffalo Gap as well. But I want to just talk about one part of it, and that is the problems you can get into with large central governments. For instance, in most of American history, obviously America's had problems like every country in the world, but the founding fathers want the federal government to be limited. Or I think some, like Jefferson said, as little government as you can have. So most things were done locally by local towns, counties, and states. That's what the 10th Amendment was. And general security was the federal government. You know that even up until the eve of World War I and even somewhat even World War II, America had a relatively small army. When America needed to go to war, which wasn't all that often because of our borders being the way they are, they just called in the militia and from the different states. And most of the time, I guess up until Vietnam, America never lost a war. Anyway, didn't have that big a central government until World War I. And anyways, things started to change. But if you can they see the core chart, Ken?
I had it up there.
Okay. Can you put it back up? I want to just go through the values that the difference between a small government and what I call socialist big government problems. Number one, true conservative values, a high belief in individual rights, Bill of Rights. But in big central governments, the belief is in the state. You believe in the state and is more important than the individual. Conservative values, freedom of religion. But in most central governments, your belief is in the leader and the state above any nominal religion. In many cases, the leader and the religious leader all kind of meld into one. You can see those problems, can't you? The problem you're going to have with that, right? That's why, King James he was head of the Church of England. You see the possible problem, but it was even worse in many European countries. Small government versus large central government, freedom of the press, but generally in socialist governments, they want the press that only supports their ideals. And have you noticed in Europe, after I read about what J.D. Vance said, and I've been hearing more and more from different things online, there is all kinds of freedom of express, freedom on the internet, social media, in European countries. And I believe I saw this one where in Germany, they raided 50 homes because people put stuff on the internet, not stuff like murder babies, stuff that the government didn't think they wanted people to see or hear or be talked about.
Mhm.
They had like a bunch of soldiers with machine guns raided their homes like they were, drug dealers.
Yeah, they've gone after people for marching with the British flag. It caused what do they say? It causes distress or something, and someone complained. It's just crazy. I mean, Vance was right for calling them out. I mean, he was absolutely right for calling the whole Europe out for that.
I am. It's almost like if someday they do get the great dictator, they've already gotten the people used to censorship.
Yeah.
You can already see a separation right now after Vance's speech over there, and with the United States possibly talking about withdrawing from NATO. And there's a ton of talk throughout Europe. I'll highlight the new Chancellor Merz in Germany. He made comments. He says, one of my foremost things is to unite Europeans. He also said we need to put, I forget how much money, but it was copious amounts of euros into retooling the industrial sector. And then you also have the, I think his name is Tusk. I think I wrote
Donald
it down.
Tusk,
yes. Yeah, in Poland. He and I'll read you the quote because it was astounding to me. 500 million Europeans are asking 300 million Americans to defend them against 140 million Russians. Europe lacks the belief that we are truly a global force. Now, these are all in Merz's comments, and also the head of the EU, I forget that lady's name, I listened to her say essentially the same thing. This is all in the last 4 or 5 days, guys, and
It's
this
moving.
is like,
there's a lot of things moving fast over there. I also think didn't that guy, aren't they putting all their young people through into the military now? I read something about that they were gonna make them all serve some time in their military. That was just recently.
Poland?
I know they doubled the size of their army. I heard they had doubled the size of their army this year.
Compulsory service is on the table in a lot of different European countries, and it is already a fact in certain other ones. I think Sweden is one, and even if you're a conscientious objector, they make you serve in the civil service or something for like an equivalent amount of time. Like they're pretty serious. They're pretty ramped up.
Oh, they are, ramped up. I guess would be the exact term.
All over there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the other things that Merz said, he questioned the future of NATO and demanded Europe boost its own defenses quickly. That's just a quote.
Yeah.
So it's heating up, and it's definitely something that people of God should be paying attention to. I actually did my video Bible study this last week on this topic, and I said, this is breadcrumbs. Follow the breadcrumbs. We're going to see these things play out real time, and whether it's Merz or some other German leader that becomes the beast power, it's formulating right now. They're doing things right now that we can see are leading towards that, and we shouldn't ignore them.
By the way, one thing from the German perspective, from their, because they may look at American troops being in their country like colonizers, but from their perspective, a united Europe, they tried to conquer Europe by force. But by being in a united Europe, they will automatically be the leader. Now think about it, especially with Britain gone. Well, let's say France and Germany together will be the leaders. But everybody knows that isn't Germany really the strongest country in Europe, and the most industrialized, and probably, if they pushed it, would have the toughest army?
It's the idea that they're going to remilitarize is going to benefit Germany extremely, and because they are so industrialized, they're really on edge about some of this trade stuff. They're really scared about their dependence on China and things like that. Demand in Europe is down, and they're having a lot of production problems. Their economy is not doing great, and the idea that they're going to re-energize it as they remilitarize, like they are a production powerhouse. You turn the gas back on full blast, they can make all kinds of stuff. So in a sense, like going to or getting ready for war is going to benefit them in the short term. I mean, who knows what any kind of war would actually turn out like, but it's given a short-term boost. When they announced when the incoming government here, and they're doing some shady stuff right now, when they announced they want to spend all this money, their stock market went nuts. Like suddenly it's a boon to their economy, because they're going to be pumping it full of defense dollars, and people are going to be working for that. And what they're doing is really shady. When the new parliament comes in, they're not going to have the votes to change their debt break thing. So they're doing it now with the lame duck parliament right now. A lot of people are fine with that. They're on board with it. They think the debt break's old, but they're making certain segments like the AFD mad, who's the fastest growing segment, because they're essentially canceling out the results of the recent election by saying, well, we're going to push this through anyway while we can before all your new representation comes in. They're energizing this other element, and they're setting themselves up for a tough time.
I just want to point something out while we're at this point of the subject. Europe is not exactly cohesive. They're not exactly, they're infighting. There's marching in Poland. There 300,000 people were marching in Poland about to declare we are a Christian nation. And there's all these, but they're kind of coming together militarily for this whole Russia and all the, kind of sounds like iron and clay to me.
Yeah.
Just wanted to point that out.
By the way, one of the critics said that this critic said they don't really love Ukraine all that much, because they know how corrupt it's always been. But they're using Ukraine and the Russian threat as an excuse to justify greater power to the common market, to the unified Europe, as opposed to the various nations within Europe. It's like a good cause, and any cause you can use to your advantage. But getting back to Ukraine, this is the part that I'm not sure about. Why did Zelensky send that letter to Trump, kind of giving in to Trump, when he had gone to, they had a NATO meeting without America, first time ever, and all those European countries said they would support Ukraine. Here's what I think. Now, it could be Zelensky is just being tricky, playing both sides to the middle. But I think Zelensky found out the Europeans are going to do a lot for me one of these days, soon, but it wasn't enough of a sure thing right away. And if Trump withdrew or continued to pause American supplies in that interim, whatever this 2 or 3 months, it could be a disaster. So, in other words, Europe is coming together, but they're not quite there yet.
Yeah, they promised a bunch of money, but I don't think he sees himself getting it anytime soon. And it was a loan. And they didn't propose just handing him cash. They calling it a loan. So, they're going to expect their money back, but we're not allowed to expect something for our money. It's just, the whole thing is just,
I've heard a lot of these guys say there is no replacement for the United States short term.
No.
Short term, there's just no way. They don't have the stuff. They don't have the equipment in place. They use our stuff. The amount that we contribute, what we put in, there's no way around it right now. But they are moving. They realize this is a problem now. So
yeah. So probably
they also want that as a. Go ahead.
Probably Zelensky will probably have to settle for a peace deal that America and Russia will make short term, but long term, we need to watch Europe. Because the German chancellor said, we want to be independent of America. You realize that that's not good for America. Actually, the whole United Europe is not good for America. America should have blocked that back when they were going from a trading bloc to a more United States of Europe. We should have used the influence. But our politicians are so, I don't know, what can I say? They just don't seem to get it. If you're really pro-American, you should have blocked it. You only want one big guy leading the West. You don't want two Western. That's just obviously balance of power theory stupidity. But our government often has done stupid things.
No kidding. Well, I would just say, do you want
Pro-
to? We skipped 1 Samuel 8:19. Do you want
Oh, I'm sorry. We
to? Do you
yes,
want to keep skipping that, or do you want to go on? You want to go past that one?
yeah. Tell you what, let's go past. I'll just mention it. Basically, the people refused to. When Samuel mentioned in chapter 12 and 13, and anyway, other places, they knew that they had sinned, but they refused to back down. They wanted a king anyway, even though they admitted that Samuel got to admit that it was really in your face to God and it was wrong, but they still wanted to do it anyway. Isn't that human nature for you? We want a king to be a hero like everybody else.
Yeah, they really blew him off. They're like, "Yeah, we'll have a king anyway. Come on, get on with it. We know we're getting our way. Just do it." It's pretty cynical.
Yes.
Oh, and on the chart, I'll just rattle off a few of these things real quickly on that chart again. The right to bear arms, that's conservative. Most liberal socialist governments, they disarm the people totally, except if they have a paramilitary group like Antifa, or, Hitler had his brown shirts and Mussolini had his black shirts. They're thugs and the only ones that have guns. Local control of education. America had that for most of our thing. The government wants total control and indoctrination. You know that Germany does not allow homeschooling?
Yeah, cradle to
I did
grave.
not know that.
And they're serious. If you try to homeschool your kids, they'll take your kids away from you. I was shocked when I found out. Of course, they believe in higher taxes. They nationalize industries or intimidate industries to go along whatever the government's programs are, not pure economic freedom. And they want total health care control of your body. Because the way they run health care, they get to control your body. When you're sick, well, we decide what treatment you can get. Or at least in theory, Americans can say, well, if I have to pay for it myself, I'll get a treatment the government won't pay for. But in many of those countries, you can't even do that.
Some have different systems. I remember reading about Lithuania, and they have a parallel system. They have this, cradle to grave, free medicine, but there's also like a thriving specialist business around that where you don't have to wait, you go pay. So it's kind of like side by side. But a lot of them are into that. They're into the higher taxes. They think that's the role of government. That's what it should do, and they're ready for that thing. Like we talked about on a different topic, they're ready. If it changes, they're ready. Like they're already used to this measure of control over life.
Yeah, they're controlling the people's life, what medicine you can get. Some cases, well, we're not going to let a 70-year-old person get a hip replacement.
Take the pill.
They're not productive enough.
That's what Obama said. Maybe grandma doesn't get the hip replacement. Just take the pill till you die.
And you realize if you don't get a hip replacement and you can't move around, you're going to die younger.
Oh, yeah. They don't care. What's her name was right with the death panels, Palin. They laughed
and we
at her.
might get more of that as big government gets to control more of your life. And one of the things that Samuel did, he found the great king for Israel. Would you go to 1 Samuel 16:7, please, Ken?
Do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature, for the Lord does not see as a man sees, for the man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. There remains yet the youngest, and there he is, keeping the sheep. Now he was ruddy and with bright eyes and good looking, and the Lord said, "Arise, anoint him, for this is the one." Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him.
I like that thing about don't look at outward appearance. But isn't it obvious that people have a hard time with that, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you go from Saul, who was a head above everybody, to little David, who's, had to stand on a crate to look over the crowd. It's quite a contrast there.
And the way it's told, David's at least older two brothers are taller and more regal looking than he is. And Samuel saw them and said, whoa, there is. They're the next king of Israel. But God looked at their heart and said, no,
but they didn't take the giant down, did they?
No.
Has anybody watched, I'm just curious, anybody in the chat room, there is what is the name of it? There's a show on one of the streaming services. I forget what it was, but it's about David, and I haven't watched it because most of the time this stuff is going to be trash coming out of Hollywood. I just wondered if anybody watched it. And I can't remember the name of this. There's like 3 or 4 episodes already been released, and I'm just curious if someone's seen it. If they have, maybe I'll take the hit and I'll watch the first episode and see if it's see if I can stand it or not.
There was a show, but it ended after about 5, 6 episodes. It was called David Good Shepherd or something like that, and there was an enemy special tank called Goliath, and he stopped it all by himself as a great war hero. And then he went on to be heroic, kind of like the role of the real David. I thought, well, wow, Hollywood's actually making something that looks good. But sure enough, it looked too good and Hollywood put an end to it. I don't know if it had bad ratings, but I don't think so. It's like, well, I could tell you other stories about things I've heard. I think they don't want anything that's too biblical principle oriented.
Oh, it's called The House of David, and it streams on.
Maybe I haven't heard that one.
It streams on Prime.
House of David.
What's the verdict? What's the verdict? How is it?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't look at what the reviews say. I haven't. I'll have to watch it. I don't trust the reviews.
Yeah. Oh, I thought maybe somebody had piped up in the chat room or something and it had some experience with it. Nah.
I don't know if that show David Shepherd or something like that. They made about 5, 6 episodes. I don't know if that's out there anywhere either, but it was for a short time. It had a guy with a great positive spirit. And he was real heroic. And I thought, well, that's a good thing for the American people to see, but Hollywood wouldn't keep it going. Didn't give it a fair chance, I don't think.
I'll give it a shot. Maybe next week if I have time, or this weekend.
And I just think people, by the way, they have actually proven this. Tall men get more brownie points for leadership and get more attention from women than men who are not tall. And I know that's, since I'm not tall, that's not fair. Not that I'm complaining. I haven't suffered all that much. I'm not complaining.
It's just so easy to look up to them. That's weak.
But just as an example, when I was at the ROTC summer camp, you had to get through this camp to get commissioned. It was one of those tough things where they tried to eliminate you. We were the best platoon in the whole thing. And our leader, the guy that the TAC officer chose, was a tall, handsome guy. And by the way, I guess he was pretty good since we did so well, so I can't really complain. But it just seems like that's what people gravitate toward. And it's really quite unfair, but who says life is fair, right?
Regarding looks, I think it's interesting that, okay, so that's Hollywood today. So you're most likely going to get a lot of that in whatever this program is Ken was talking about. They're not going to highlight anything like what it says in verse 13, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David from that day forward. And then in verse 14, what happens when you don't please God? Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord terrorized him. Now those are cautionary 2 verses in the Bible that I bet you won't see in that series on David.
Someone actually in the chat room said the opening scene will upset you. So I don't know. I figured great. We're not starting off good, but I'm gonna watch it anyway.
Yeah.
So anyway,
there's scope to do something really well, and often it just doesn't turn out. There's so much that could be done that's good in those stories. And
where's Cecil B. DeMille when you need him?
At least you can read the book. Yeah.
Yeah, the book is always better.
Book's always better.
Can you read Acts 13:22? This is Paul's comments that Paul was making about the Messiah.
And when he had removed him, he raised up for them David as king, to whom also he gave testimony and said, I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after my own heart, who will do all my will.
And cue with Acts 2:29, kind of throw both of these in here as our final scripture.
Of the patriarch David, that he is both dead and buried, and in his tomb is with us to this day, being a prophet, and knowing that God had sworn with an oath to him that if the fruit of his body, according to the flesh, he would raise up the Christ to sit on his throne.
Think about it. God loved David so much that the Messiah would be born in David's ancestry. I mean, the people that, I didn't say ancestry. I mean his, what word am I thinking of? The people who followed David, David's kids, grandkids, et cetera. His heritage. They would be, David's heritage in the future would include the Messiah, the Son of God. What greater compliment can you make to a man than that?
Yeah. Yep.
And by the way, there's a scripture that's kind of confusing, and Paul brings it up, where it seems like David is saying, he said, tell my Lord to sit at my right hand. It's like he's both your child and he's God. And it's that confusing. But in the context in which it was meant, God became the great grandchild of David. I know that it sounds, but that's what actually happened. And so it's kind of confusing when you read it, but that's the reality of it. That's how much he loved David. And so what we should try to do is have the heart of David. And if you've lost your good looks, like some of us have, we get older, don't let it bother you. You got the great heart, right?
Yeah.
And girls are no longer throwing themselves at you. The world doesn't come to an end, right?
Oh.
Okay.
Right.
The thing I thought we could mention here is, are people still attracted to a government that will give them everything they want?
Well, well, in this country, a fair bit, but obviously not as many as we used to think, because they didn't vote for it last go around. I think people are starting to get tired of all the corruption and the theft and the bullying of the government. People want to run their own lives the best they can, but the number that don't want to do things that way is scary, because it used to be everybody was on board with that. At least 90% of the population when I was younger didn't want no part of big government. They didn't want no part of everybody telling them what to do. But that changed in the last 40 years, big time. So,
yeah, like forcing people to be vaccinated on an experimental vaccine, whether you wanted it or not. And it proved out not to be true. In other words, you can take the vaccine and still get the disease again anyway. Actually, it would appear natural immunity is better. But I think people are slowly, wait a minute, big government was wrong. And I think that's good for Americans to realize. And also, I do think the world will discover this someday. If the government is big enough to give you everything you think you need, it's big enough to take it away from you too, and restrict your freedom.
Right. And the founding fathers knew that. That's why they said these core rights come from God, because only God can take those away, not man. So, free speech, right to bear arms, right to assemble, be in your houses and be secure and all that sort of stuff. That doesn't come from the government. We have those. We're born with those rights.
By the way, people are going to say, what's going to happen to the world? And I'm going to talk about this in my sermon next week. Hopefully they'll get around to seeing it on the web some in the relatively near future. I think there's a backlash coming. But I agree with, I think it was you that, wasn't it you, Tracy, or Michael, that said in the short run, or was it Ken, America's probably going to have its way in the short run because nobody else is quite ready to take over the leadership mantle in spite of all the talk.
Yeah, Michael.
I said
yeah.
that. Yeah, I said that. Yeah, yeah, and we very well may get our own way in the short term because the idea it's such a big change that it's not going to happen overnight. Even if they want it, even if everybody wants it, it's not automatic.
Yeah, the fact that we're everybody's protector, we're everybody's mama, we're everybody's, they use us for everything, and there isn't a quick replacement for that.
And also, even the thought that the dollar will no longer be the world's reserve currency. I heard an expert claim that tariffs actually strengthen the dollar because it pours more money into DC. So the American dollar will probably remain, at least for a few more years, the world's reserve currency. Yeah. Probably he's right.
I think they need to do a better job of explaining why we're putting these tariffs on. They're doing it to us. They've been doing it to us for decades. You can't sell cars into China. You can't, they just keep our stuff out. They won't allow I don't think you can see a Chevy driving around in Japan, but they're selling them to us. These countries don't play fair. They won't let us into their country, but they expect us to let them into our country unfettered without any restrictions or anything. And the world doesn't know that. We know it, but I don't think most of the country, our country, knows that. They won't let our dairy in. They won't let our grain in. They won't let our this in. But they don't let our wine in, whatever, because they want to make sure they sell theirs. Well, in a free world, in a free market, if theirs is better, their people will buy theirs. But they protect theirs and put tariffs and restrictions on everything going from our country to theirs for decades. 70, 80, 90, just forever. And now Trump says, look, no more. You do it to us, we're doing it to you until you stop. And they won't capitulate. But nobody says that.
I think part of the problem is our media. At least not everybody, but a lot of the media, either they don't know economics that well and they don't like Trump. So they can say, the mean old Trump is beating up on all our allies with these evil tariffs. He's really trying to negotiate fair trade. To me, that's obvious, and you can, but our media doesn't. How often have you heard the media say Trump is pushing for fair trade by using the tariffs as a stick to force countries to give us better deals?
Right. He just wants them to play fair. They just not doing it. They won't say that.
Everybody takes advantage of Uncle Sugar.
That's it.
Well, we've had this extended period of prosperity and influence around the world where the United States is doing all kinds of business. Our stuff's not really out of control. Well, here in the more recent past, our stuff is out of control. Our economy, our debt, things are going in a really, really bad direction. And, whereas when the money's flowing in, maybe you can afford to be taken advantage of a little bit, or these things kind of creep on and get piled on over the years. And then, oh, look, like now it's a lot and now it's everything. And it's not, it's not free trade all over the world by no means. All these products going back and forth, so many of which you mentioned, that's very much true.
Yeah,
but we also won't take Chinese cars. We're not going to let the Chinese come in here and sell a $10,000 electric car because we know what that's going to do to some of our industry also. Nobody's playing with that. Even Biden was talking about tariffs and stuff on that, because there's a lot of money, there's a lot of wealth at stake if some of our rules go away as well in this country. And so,
well, the Chinese are going to do that to Europe. And they're still working on it, but the Europeans are putting some tariffs on Chinese electric cars. But the Chinese, they dump with government subsidies, and then they run all the domestic producers out of business, So they're the only ones making it. Then they can raise prices and and recoup their losses. But that's so unfair to domestic producers.
Yeah.
You look at a city like Detroit, and I'm not saying Detroit's only problem was the factories closing, but that was at least a contributing problem. And Detroit looks like parts of look like a ghost town compared to how it looked. I remember visiting Detroit on a frat meeting. I think it was 1964. Detroit was a great city. I mean, nothing was perfect, but it was a great city, booming industry. Detroit has gone down so much. Any thoughts, Ken?
Oh yeah, I mean Detroit. I mean they're turning it back into farmland. It's bad. I mean they show you now and then someone will show a picture of a house from like just 10, 15 years ago. This nice, beautiful house with the lawn and everything. Now the house. I mean the house was like brand new. Now it's falling in. Nobody's taking care of it. Same place, same block, same house. It's just coming apart. I mean that's every blue city just about. I mean in the country with a few exceptions. As they're just,
and a lot of these factories are they call them, they're rusted out because foreign competitors have taken their market.
yeah. I mean, one of the worst ones. I mean, Detroit's bad. So is Youngstown. Youngstown is horrible. Huge, massive factories that are just gone, and the buildings are still there, and they're just rusting, and the roofs are caving
Didn't that
in.
used to be? Didn't that used to be the iron capital of America, Youngstown? Am I
Youngstown,
getting?
yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. And see, when Trump puts tariffs on aluminum and iron, everybody's all upset. He's trying to save what's left of America's steel and aluminum industry. To me, that's pretty obvious, but our media doesn't seem to get it.
No.
The media likes the big headlines that what we've just been talking about. And right now, okay, we can all applaud, I think, most of everything we see the Trump administration doing. You might even say there's some righteousness returning to the land. But I think the people of God should remember that the things that are happening on the ground right now, geopolitics, geostrategy, military-wise, Europe is going to rise. And at that time, everything happens, king of the north to the king of the south, the Holy Land gets invaded. It's all happening there. And America is not mentioned in scripture all during those prophetic events. So at some point, Jacob's trouble is coming. And that's probably closer in our near future, right? When peace and safety and sudden destruction falls on them. Well, people are liking what they see in America right now, and they feel safer. I'll tell you, I feel a sense of it. But I also know scripture to be true, and these things are going to happen. So maybe enjoy these headlines today because they could turn ugly in a new moon.
Yeah, we don't know how long we've got. As I say, we could have many years of relative normality in American domination or less. And like you say, remember the Soviet Union was communism was so powerful. And then I think it started in 89, but by 91, the whole communist empire collapsed in about 7 weeks. Most unbelievable thing I've ever seen. I mean, I realize they started to fall apart a few years earlier as Gorbachev tried to fix it, but still, the actual collapse was fast. And could that happen to America? Right now, I think we're on a good course. There'll be problems, but I think we'll weather them. All I can say is I tell people to pray for America, that we can last as long as possible. And dare I say, maybe even if we have to come down, have a safer landing than otherwise. I mean, because there is a Bible principle that prophecies can fail. And I'm not just speaking about Nineveh. There are a couple others. I just don't think of them right at the top of my mind, where certain things changed because of what certain people prayed. I'd have to, I had one of them in my mind. I can't think of it. My only point is things can change based on our prayers and on people acting better. If America could be more righteous, could we have more good times? I'm not predicting that. I'm just stating what is possible.
I don't know. I pray thy kingdom come. I want to see God's kingdom come so bad. I sigh and cry for what I see in the world. One thing the Trump administration hasn't talked about is the 350 to 500,000 missing young people.
Oh, yeah.
Where are they? I haven't heard a word of that. These are children, unaccompanied minors, almost 500,000 thought to be sold into the sexual slave traffic in this country. And again, not a peep out of this administration. And I believe things like that we should be sighing and crying for. Where's the administration on that issue alone? I haven't heard it once in the media since Trump has come in. Not once.
Oh.
It was mentioned a lot by the conservative media before Trump got in. Not a peep since. We should be sighing and crying for that. Where are these children?
Well, it's only been 6 weeks, and he's just now getting his cabinet in. So I'm sure we'll hear about it in the future. I'm sure they'll. I mean, what's his name? What's his Holgram or whatever, the guy on the border, and then maybe Pam Bondi. Maybe, or actually, and you know what?
They're more worried about getting the Epstein files released and the trucklout of documents, and they're going to be redacted. That's consuming the media.
I mean, they just
it's not completely unrelated.
They just got there.
By the way,
exactly.
I think I have heard Holman mention the children.
He does.
Actually,
he
has
does.
like a whole litany of complaints, but he listed children as one of his complaints. Now, he doesn't emphasize it. He spends most of his time mad at the blue states that are protecting the criminals or harboring them. But I think he has mentioned it among his many litanies of complaints. Tom Holman has. But he's the only one I think I've heard recently mention it. And it's going to be a problem. These cities are so big, and the ghettos are probably so run by gangs and drug dealers. It's not going to be easy to find those missing kids. We'll see. I mean, it'd be wonderful, like you say, if in a few weeks they start finding them. Because what I think probably happened is the drug cartels use the kids to get other people across. You put a kid with them, and our government, it's a family with kids. They treat them much nicer. I heard they use some kids even more than once. And they would tell our government, well, I've got an aunt in Boston, and her name is whatever, and I'm going to stay with her. All of which was fictitious, by the way. And once they let them released inside America, who knows where that kid went, and who knows what the drug cartels did with them. And you probably saw this too, didn't you, Tracy? They showed little armbands on the kids' wrist. They had who they were supposed to ask for when they got to Boston. And a lot of them were issued by the gangs to show they owed the gangs labor for their smuggling them into America. I thought, this is terrible. And this was allowed under the Biden administration, by the way. It's a mess, but you're right, Tracy. It's a horrible mess. And America's got a lot of sin. And by the way, I don't think that Trump can turn this ship around overnight.
No.
I heard them celebrating on the media. He hasn't bought inflation yet. He hasn't stopped it. Oh, they were so happy about that. I remind everybody that evil and wickedness that is in this country may just be in the shadows right now, but it hasn't gone anywhere.
Yeah. And it's not going to be easy to catch them or turn it around. And I even think the Biden administration did a few low things the last couple of weeks just to make it hard for Trump coming in.
They absolutely did.
So, including spending, even that 2 million chickens they killed because they thought they might have the bird flu. What if they thought, well, there's a chance they don't have it, but let's kill the chickens anyway to drive up the price that Trump will have to deal with after? Because does that make sense? The people who were there a few months before you, they set the table for the prices you're going to face.
Right.
And they were so happy Trump hasn't been able to turn inflation around yet. I just think it's going to take more time. But you're right. There's a lot of wickedness. And I'm hoping that the wickedness can decline.
Yeah.
if they'll root out a lot of these criminal migrant gangs and stuff like that come illegally and operate illegally, that'll be a big step in the right direction, because there's some heinous stuff that goes on in that realm. I read a story this week. It was in Mexico. These like 9 kids had been missing. I say kids, like young adult, late teenage, whatever. Found them all dismembered and stuff, probably because they've been screwing around with drugs, with drug cartel stuff or whatever.
I think it was 25, Michael.
Well, it's probably a separate story, Tracy, because these were in a car and their hands were gone and it was messed up. It's just some gnarly stuff that goes on in the world, and that's what you have coming over. That's got to be rooted out of here, because those kids that are missing, on account of that, you might probably never going to see them again. There's probably not anything to find. They're not going to leave any evidence of what has transpired by the time that they're done, or they're going to be so long gone that what can you do? Then there's a lot of that needs to get turned around. Back to our subject of Samuel, right? It's interesting, during this portion of his life, the country is blessed and protected. They're at peace with their enemies and all this stuff. He established the law. He was a righteous judge who traveled around, and people could come for justice and come for counsel. And I don't think we should, underestimate the potential, because God's law says that if anybody takes hold of it, like, it will be a blessing to them. And by all means, it's got to start with the people to want this evil out of our societies and out of our everyday lives. And it starts, in the heart and in the mind.
One thing I like, and I was surprised Trump said it. He said there are only 2 genders. I think that shocked the left, because they've been pushing this garbage.
Yeah.
And at least in some areas, he's asking.
Well, I think we went over our allotted time because Dr. Riggs froze up. Well,
that's the limit.
Yep, I think we've reached it. It's 17 after, and I don't know if he's going to make it back or not. So I will just say good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our program tonight, and everybody enjoy the rest of your Sabbath. And we'll see you back here again. Oh, you're back. You want to say something before we close out?
Oh, I said the wrong thing, and the evil world froze me out.
Microsoft shut you down, man. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Sabbath blessings, everybody.
We're happy you could make it. So glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.